What happens when you defend the voiceless? The shocking truth Jesus revealed. It started with a scream. Not the kind of scream you hear in a horror film. This was real. Raw, desperate, the kind that rips straight through the soul. I was walking down a dusty road in a village overseas, far from the comfort of my home, when I saw her, no older than 13, being dragged by two men into the back of a truck. Her eyes locked with mine for a split second. In that one moment, I saw terror. I saw hopelessness. I saw a soul begging to be rescued. And I did nothing. I froze. I was scared, outnumbered, confused, and in that eternal second where a life could have been saved, I turned away. But that moment wrecked me. Because I realized I had just betrayed the very gospel I claimed to live by. Jesus didn't turn away. Jesus ran toward the oppressed. He broke cultural rules, defied social norms, and risked everything to defend the vulnerable. And here I was, silent, still, and scared. Why'd I start here? Because this isn't about shame. It's about awakening. And if you're watching this, it means something inside you is already stirring. That whisper in your heart, saying, "There's more. You're meant for more." This video will not just inspire you, it will change you, because when we talk about advocating for the oppressed, we're not talking about an optional side quest for super Christians. We're talking about the core mission of Jesus Christ. Let me show you what that really means. _blank. Let's rewind 2.000 years. Picture a hot, dusty street in ancient Jerusalem. Crowds are buzzing. Roman soldiers patrol the corners. Merchants yell over each other to sell their goods. But then, silence. A group of religious leaders throws a woman to the ground. Her clothes are torn, her face bruised, her eyes swollen from crying. They shout, "This woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says she must be stoned. What do you say?" They weren't asking Jesus a question. They were setting a trap. If he said to let her go, he'd be accused of breaking the law. If he said to stone her, he'd contradict his own message of mercy. Everyone's watching. But Jesus kneels down. He starts writing in the dust. The crowd is confused. The tension is unbearable. And then he looks up and says the words that still shake the world. "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." Boom! Every rock drops to the ground. One by one, they walk away. And Jesus? He looks at the woman, not with condemnation, but compassion, and says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Do you see what just happened? Jesus didn't just rescue her physically. He advocated for her soul. He didn't ignore the sin. He transformed the sinner. He didn't affirm what she did. He affirmed who she was. And here's the powerful truth. Jesus stood between her and her oppressors, absorbing the danger that was meant for her. And he calls you and me to do the same. Let that sink in for a second. How many times do we see injustice and scroll past it? How often do we avoid the hard conversations, the awkward moments, the risk of rejection, just to stay safe? But what if I told you, your silence might be someone else's prison? Jesus doesn't need more spectators. He's looking for advocates. And that doesn't mean you need a platform, a megaphone, or a viral post. It starts in your ordinary, in the shadows, in the moments no one sees. Because the greatest acts of advocacy often happen behind closed doors. Like the foster mom who refuses to give up on the teenager who's been bounced around from home to home, each time carrying more trauma than before. Like the young man who speaks up for a bullied classmate, even when it costs him popularity. Like the woman who risks her career to report systemic abuse in her company. They're not famous, but heaven knows their names. Jesus knows their names. And He's calling your name too. But here's what's wild. When you advocate for others, you don't just change their life, you change yours. I remember years later, after that moment overseas haunted me for far too long, I got another chance. This time, it was a teenage boy in my city. Homeless, abandoned by his parents, addicted to substances. Everyone had given up on him. But I remembered the girl I couldn't save. So this time, I stayed. It was messy, painful, inconvenient. But Jesus didn't call me to comfort. He called me to crosses. That boy, he got clean. He found Christ. And now he's mentoring others in the same position he was once in. And I learned something so deep it shattered me. When you carry someone's burden, you meet Jesus in the weight. So let me ask you right now, who's the person in your life that God's been putting on your heart? The one you keep noticing? The one the world keeps overlooking? What if you're the miracle they've been praying for? What if God placed you in their path not by accident, but as an answer? In the next segment, we're going to uncover one of the most overlooked moments in Jesus' life. When He stood up for someone that no one else dared to defend, and it changed the course of history. Next up, the day Jesus defended the one no one dared to touch, and why that still matters today. Imagine this. A man is sitting alone outside the city gates. He hasn't hugged his children in years. He hasn't looked another person in the eye without them recoiling. He is the definition of abandoned, forgotten, cursed. He's a leper. In Jesus' time, leprosy wasn't just a disease. It was a sentence. If you had it, you were cut off, spiritually unclean, legally isolated, socially invisible. People would shout, "Unclean, unclean," as you approached. So they had time to get away. You weren't just sick, you were shamed. And here's what most people forget. The law forbid even touching them. So what does Jesus do? He walks straight toward the leper. And the man, desperate, broken, trembling, falls to his knees and says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Pause. This is not just a cry for healing. It's a plea for dignity, for restoration, for someone, anyone, to see him not as a monster, but as a man. Jesus could have healed him with a word, from a distance. But He doesn't. He reaches out and touches him. "I am willing," Jesus says, "be clean." Instantly, the leprosy disappears. But more than that, the shame disappears, the separation disappears, the stigma disappears. Because Jesus didn't just heal his body. He restored his humanity. That one act, touching the untouchable, shook the very foundation of religious norms and cultural fear. And it speaks straight into our world today. Because we live in a society that still casts people outside the city gates. We exile the poor to the margins. We silence the abused. We stigmatize the mentally ill. We distance ourselves from addicts, immigrants, inmates, outcasts, the traumatized, the inconvenient. But if Jesus touched a leper, then who are we afraid to touch? Who are we afraid to sit beside, to advocate for, to risk our reputation for? Because if you're following Jesus, you're called to touch the untouchable. You're called to stand beside the isolated, to speak up for the voiceless. And yes, it will cost you. It might cost you friends, comfort, security, popularity. But it's supposed to. Because when you stand with the oppressed, you stand where Jesus stands. That's where the fire of real faith lives. I remember this one story. A woman I met who ran a rehabilitation shelter for former prostitutes. For years, people mocked her, called her naive, said the women didn't deserve help, said it was a waste of time. But she said something I'll never forget. They said I shouldn't throw my pearls before swine, but I realized they weren't swine. They were pearls, buried under a world that told them they were trash. That's what advocating for the oppressed is all about. It's about finding pearls in the mud. Seeing dignity where others see disgrace. Calling out the divine where the world only sees damage. And that's exactly what Jesus did over and over again. He sat at tables with tax collectors, who were seen as traitors. He defended women who were sexually exploited and shamed. He praised the faith of foreigners and Samaritans, people Jews were taught to avoid. Jesus had every right to stay clean, polished, and popular. Instead, he got down in the dirt, in the pain, in the mess of people's lives. Because love doesn't stay safe. Love moves toward the pain. You want to live like Christ? Move toward the pain. Because here's what most people don't realize. You don't just find the oppressed in slums or war zones. You find them in boardrooms, in schools, in churches, in your own home. I once had a friend. Let's call her Maria. Brilliant, soft-spoken, always the first to serve. No one knew she was being abused by her husband behind closed doors. She told me, years later, what saved her wasn't a sermon. It wasn't a hotline. It was a friend, a quiet woman from her church, who looked her in the eye one Sunday and said, "You don't seem okay. I'm here. Whenever you're ready, I'll walk with you." That was the lifeline she needed. That's advocacy. Sometimes it's not shouting with megaphones. It's whispering hope into the silence. Sometimes it's not holding a sign. It's holding someone's hand. Sometimes it's not a platform. It's a presence. And this is where your calling gets personal. Because right now, there's someone in your life who feels invisible. Someone on the edge of despair. Someone waiting for a voice to call them by name. You could be that voice. And maybe you're scared, maybe you feel unqualified. But let me remind you. Moses had a stutter. David was the least of his brothers. Esther was an orphan. Mary was a teenage girl. Peter was impulsive and scared. Paul was a former murderer. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And if you've got breath in your lungs and a heart that beats for justice, you're called. But here's the twist. The moment you step into this calling, you will face opposition. You will feel resistance. And it won't just come from the world. Sometimes it will come from religious people. Just like it did for Jesus. They called him a blasphemer, a drunkard, a friend of sinners. But here's the truth. If religious people aren't questioning your closeness to the outcasts, maybe you're not close enough. Because Jesus wasn't crucified for healing people. He was crucified for confronting systems. He was executed not for being too soft, but for being too dangerous to the status quo. And when you start advocating for the oppressed, the same thing will happen to you. You'll become dangerous to apathy, to injustice, to the forces of darkness. But you'll also become alive. More alive than you've ever been. Because when you walk where Jesus walks, you find the life you were always meant to live. In the final segment, we're going to explore the ultimate act of advocacy in human history. The moment Jesus stood up not just for the oppressed, but for all of us. And what that means for the way you live, love, and fight for others starting today. Coming up, the cross, God's boldest act of advocacy, and what it demands of us now. There was no courtroom, no lawyer, no fair trial, only a whip, a crown of thorns, a wooden cross, and a man they called Jesus, bloodied, mocked, humiliated, dragging himself through the streets, with a jeering crowd watching every step. But if you and I had been standing there that day, we might have missed the point entirely. Because it looked like a defeat. It looked like oppression had won. But what no one realized, not the soldiers, not the priests, not even his disciples, was that this wasn't a man being crushed by injustice. This was the Son of God standing up, in the most radical way imaginable, for the oppressed soul of humanity. That day at Calvary, Jesus wasn't just dying for sinners in general. He was advocating for you, for me. He stood in the gap we couldn't cross. He bore the punishment we couldn't bear. He cried out, "Father, forgive them," with blood still dripping from his forehead. Why? Because he saw the oppressed in all of us. He saw the burden of shame, the weight of abuse, the prison of addiction, the trauma of poverty, the ache of abandonment. He saw what no one else sees, the soul crushed by the enemy and the systems of this world. And he said, "I will not let them be destroyed. I will take their place." Do you get it now? The cross is not just forgiveness. It's advocacy at the highest level. It's God saying, "I will fight your battles. I will silence your accusers. I will stand between you and death, and I will not move." So how can we believe in that kind of Savior, and stay silent when others are crushed? How can we say we follow Jesus, and turn away from those being trafficked, tortured, silenced, overlooked, erased? No, my friend, if we belong to that cross, then we are called to live that kind of love. Not passive, not polite, not polished, but pierced, poured out, protective. And I know it sounds hard. You might be thinking, "I'm not Jesus, I'm just one person." Exactly. But you are one person filled with His Spirit. Which means every time you lift your voice for the voiceless, Jesus is lifting with you. Every time you show up for someone who's been forgotten, Jesus is there, whispering, "Well done." Every time you risk your comfort to defend someone's dignity, heaven stands and takes notice. Because you are not doing this alone. You are not a hero. You're a vessel. And through you, Jesus continues to walk into dark places and flip tables over injustice. He continues to kneel beside those in shame. He continues to break chains. That's what's at stake here. And you don't need to move to another country to start. You start at your dinner table, at your school, in your office, at your church, in your neighborhood, with that kid everyone bullies, with that woman who walks with her head down, with that man who no one believes in anymore. You don't need to change the whole world. You just need to change one world. And here's a powerful truth Jesus taught that the world often forgets. Whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Did you catch that? Jesus didn't say, "You did it like it was for me." He said, "You did it to me." When you feed the hungry, you're feeding Jesus. When you defend the abused, you're defending Jesus. When you lift up the weary, you're lifting Jesus. This is not charity. This is worship. And if we're not living this way, we're missing the gospel entirely. So let's ask the question that changes everything. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to be known as someone who looked away, or someone who looked injustice in the eye and said, "Not on my watch"? Do you want your children, your friends, your community to remember you as safe, or sacrificial? Do you want to build a life of convenience, or a life of consequence? Because you and we get one shot at this. One short vapor of a life. And every day is a chance to show the world what Jesus is really like. Not just in our words, but in our wounds, in our actions, in our advocacy. And I promise you this, it will not be easy. You will be misunderstood, criticized, opposed. But when you stand before Jesus, face to face, and He shows you the lives you touched, the chains you broke, the tears you dried, the justice you fought for, every cost will feel like nothing. Because that's the moment you were born for. Let's live like it. Let's love like Him. Let's advocate like everything depends on it. Because for someone, it does. And maybe you've been watching this and thinking, I'm too late. I've been too afraid. I've missed too many chances. Let me tell you this with all the fire in my soul. You are not too late. God specializes in second chances. And if you've failed before, good, so have I, so did Peter, so did Paul. Failure doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. You've seen what happens when you stay silent. Now it's time to see what happens when you speak. You've felt the ache of missed moments. Now it's time to feel the fire of redemption. Because God is not done with you. In fact, He's just getting started. So get up. Speak out. Stand firm. Love fiercely. Advocate boldly. Because the oppressed aren't waiting for a savior. They're waiting for you. In Jesus, He's already gone before you. Now it's your turn. Step into the story. Become the advocate you were born to be. Let's change the world, one act of courage at a time. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind. To set the oppressed free. Luke chapter 4 verse 18. What happens when you defend the voiceless? The shocking truth Jesus revealed. Like, share, and comment if this message shook your soul. Subscribe for more real stories that bring Jesus to life. Tag someone who needs to hear this today.